I thank you for coming back from coffee break and listening to my story. Today, I want to talk to you about how we developed an ecosystem for sharing data. And I'm going to particularly talk about how we've done that in the disease area. As was said, this is our 20th anniversary for this project. So there's certainly a lot of thought and retrospective thought on where we've been, how we grow. How do you build an ecosystem for data management and for data exchange in our world? And so I'll walk you through some of the story and give you some examples of that. And hopefully this advances. It's supposed to. Let's see. Yeah, it's in presenter mode. So let's see. Down arrow's not working. Huh? No. Okay. Let's see if I return. Maybe it'll work. Nope. Okay. Well, an ecosystem, I'll talk about that a little bit while we're trying to get these slides advanced. So an ecosystem is really thinking about data that's been created under different frameworks, using different standards, different models, and different time frames. Really thinking about how we connect that data. How do we bring in development? So do I just down arrow? Left, right arrow. Okay, thanks so much. So how do we bring that development together so all these cogs fit together? Every system that's built, different modeling, different funding, different purposes, and over different time periods. So maybe you're developing a resource today and you're wanting to match up to resources that were built over the last 5 or 10 years, or in my case, the last 20 years. How do you do that and how do you see how they were built so that you can integrate? We all have the goals these days of having that data interoperability and really having data integration. So a lot of what I'll talk about today is how do we look across those scales? How do we figure out how each of us can fit together to add new analyses in, ask new questions, take advantage of what's been developed in other resources? How do we actually build an ecosystem together, no matter what type of data that's being built? Yes, it worked. Okay, great. So here I'm showing you a representation of thinking about it from the disease perspective. With disease in the middle, there are so many different types, in this example, of other types of data that can be interconnected. It is really a web of information out there. And what I'm showing you here is a number of representatives of groups that we work with. We work very hard to document the various resources that interconnect with us. One example I didn't put on this slide is we link through disease concepts in our ontology to over 50 other biomedical ontologies. So again, you want to think about how you're interconnecting, how do you make it available, what's your licensing? I'll talk about those things on the next slide. But again, there's different types of data that can be interconnected. And this, again, is just a really representing the ecosystem that we've built, we've been part of. And it is very much a partnership. You're linking through data, they're linking to you. But again, just to represent that it is possible, it is something that's built over time. Now, when you're thinking about this ecosystem, it is very much from your perspective, whether you're the developer of a new resource today or you want to link to someone else's resource. Things to think about is what this slide's about. Think about the licensing. It was mentioned in the keynote this morning. How do we license our data? How do we make it available? Where does that data come from? What is the integrity of the data? Can people utilize the data you're collecting? Maybe you're reporting who you got it from and when was it released? How is it available? Many of the aspects on this slide is really thinking about how can you create an ecosystem in the data area you're working in? How do you interconnect it? Who are your partners you're working with? Partnerships take a long time. You may meet someone at the conference today you want to start collaborating with, and that will again be built over time through trust. I'm talking about data exchange, where the data is, what is its availability. Now I'll talk a little bit about the ecosystem specifically for the disease ontology. So 20 years is a long time, right? We were very young researchers back when we started all of this. But over time, it's evolved to make it more available. So we started with licensing, was a little more restrictive. We now are CC0 licensing. For us, that does not really come with a cost, but the benefit that it's come with is that pharma can use us openly, all sorts of proprietary resources. They'll contact us and ask about our licensing. That's how I know about it. Because there's many resources that I don't know about, but again, changing our licensing allowed us to be more open and allow us to have more availability to other users. And you can read about CC's licensing on their website at the Creative Commons. Another thing to think about when building an ecosystem is where is your data Where are the primary sources of your data? Where is it represented? Where is it archived? We were just chatting before this session, thinking about, well, how are they updated? When are they updated? That's still a common problem, to look at the resources you're gathering from. When are they updated last? What's the release cycle? What's their availability? It's something to think about. At the bottom of the slide, I really want to just mention some of these best practices. I found us being at the 20th year of the resource, it really makes us thinking about, makes us think a lot about what the resource is, where we've come from. And so I wanted to share some of what I thought are best practices. Maybe you're new at developing a resource. Really thinking about quality control is a major aspect of this, thinking about where you're getting your data, documenting how it's coming in, how are you assessing that data. So these are some of those examples. Again, actively engaging with your contributors and other developers makes your resource stronger. That's what we found. Collaborating with data repositories, people that are housing my data or using data that's connected to ours, working with them actively, again, to see that we're meeting their needs, and then seeing how we need to develop further to maybe those areas we're not meeting their needs over time. And then again, working with all sorts of software developments groups, and also assessing what's being utilized, like this first speaker this morning. Very much thinking about how it can be used, kind of keeping an eye out in that world, and seeing how data can be assessed. And I just put a couple examples at the bottom of different packages and applications I did not know anything about, but again, we research it and we want to see how we're used to really inform maybe how we should develop. This slide's really supposed to represent a continuation over time, thinking about how you build one of these ecosystems and you coordinate knowledge development. Very much it is not just happening all today, it is years of different types of development, thinking early on to the types of data we're going to represent. How do we represent them and organize that information? How do we continue to develop that data modeling, and then how do we evolve with new data coming in? Molecular subtypes in cancers are a great example of this. A little over 10 years ago, we really weren't looking at these, but now we have to think of these quite deeply with cancer subtypes. So we continually look at what the field is, what are the types of studies that are being done to, again, assess the modeling for building a community type resource. And then the other things this slide is also showing is it's an evolution of organization, going from a couple of researchers working together to building a team to getting funding to, again, being part of this community conversation for what data needs to be carried out, the assessment needs to be carried out, how do you want to represent it, where do we make it public, those kinds of things. Now here I just want to talk a little bit about disease modeling in and of itself, the journey for the last 20 years. As we first looked at this data, literally the first time I saw this resource, it was a list of disease terms in alphabetical order. And that's nice. You may see that represented on many websites, and that's nothing wrong with that. But for modeling it, for looking at semantic connections between diseases and codifying that, we need to move from the left side of the slide to the right. And this is exactly what we did. We looked at categories. What are common categories across different types of disease? Metabolic diseases are organized very differently than genetic diseases or even diseases based on anatomy. So you have to think about what I guess the depth of our data model, and make sure that changes with time. For mental health diseases, the DSM comes out every number of years. Again, we have to think about how that representation has to be integrated into what we're doing. But because we collect data over so many years and then resources connect to us over those years, they may have a disease that was annotated to say to their gene or to their protein 10 years ago. Maybe that disease name changed today or last week, a new nomenclature, a new classification system. How do we go from 10 years ago data to today data and make sure those data connections aren't broken? So that's something that we continue to work on. And what I'm showing on the far right of the slide is work that my clinician team worked on the last 2 years, as we are more deeply delving into complex diseases and how do we represent them beyond genetics, beyond symptoms and anatomy. How do we look at epigenetics? How do we look at socioeconomic factors that influence disease, environmental drivers, things like that. And that's the stage we're at now. But again, this slide is really meant to show how are we changing our modeling to represent the changes and the shifts in the data that we're handling and that we're coming across in literature. So really, what is the dough? So for me, the dough first and foremost is our community. It is community built resource, which means it represents the needs of the community, the data changes we see in literature, the databases that are representing other entities. I showed you on an earlier slide, proteins, pathways, all sorts of types of data. How do they represent disease and how do we coordinate? Our goal with all these groups is to help them better represent their data and hopefully unify their data through disease, enabling them not to have to go look up all those nomenclature changes, but to have a single resource to come together. On the far right of the slide, you're seeing our graph modeling. This is classic ontology modeling, where you have representation of diseases and the relationships between them. They inherit that information down the tree. So a child term represents the same sort of information that a parent term, but maybe some more specifics that differentiate it, like a subtype in a molecular subtype of a cancer. In the middle, what I'm showing you is the knowledge base, and that's what I'm introducing today. The disease ontology has shifted from being not only just a disease ontology, which we still do, and we'll still classify diseases. We've also built now and are continuing to build a knowledge base. And what this means is the things you see at the bottom of the slide. We're collecting that information, we're collating it, organizing it, and annotating it. And yes, we were doing those things before. And disseminating it and connecting it. But what we're doing is we're connecting data across the realm of types of things that connect with disease. So not just diseases, those symptoms, those phenotypes, the anatomy, the age of onset, all of these other bits of information that also describe disease, we're interconnecting them all so you can, and I'll show you in a minute, in the resource, you can kind of traverse them all so that you can actually say, well, I have a patient that has these 3 phenotypes. They have a certain age of onset. What other diseases have that information connected? That's where the knowledge base comes in. That's where we want to really be able to further refine how we're looking at data, think of disease in a new way. Also give new tools for exploration. So I just have a screenshot here. This is our new web page. You can get to the same old disease ontology web page you've always been. I have stickers too if you need the QR code to get to our website, and I can hand them out afterwards. Happy to do that. And I have some giveaways if we get to meet up. This is our new website just to introduce it. You can get to the ontology just as you could before, but the knowledge base is what I really want to talk about. So when you first click on the regular part of the disease ontology website, you're used to seeing the trees. Don't worry, the trees haven't gone away. We still have a representation of the diseases there and their subtypes, but we also have, with that pop-up box, you're seeing all the imports. So we bring in data about other things that connect to disease. Like I said, symptoms and phenotypes. Those are all represented by other ontologies in the OBO Foundry. So all that data is regularized. It's all quality controlled, standard representations, and the semantics. So if you look at the cell types or the phenotypes, and you're curious about how the different phenotypes are related to each other, this allows you to kind of mine that information and walk through it because the semantics are included. So this is just showing you the ontology itself, a few statistics on the side. We grow by about 700 new diseases that are curated every single year. So we go through literature, we go through databases, we work with a number of groups. So this year we've been focusing on GARD and Orphanet to bring in more rare diseases. We've teamed up with Unipro to improve our representation of diseases in their database, just for an example. We cross-map, as we've talked about, or I talked about earlier, to other clinical vocabularies. This is something we started at the very beginning to make sure those mappings are rigorous. We reassess them all the time, but again, so you can have connections by walking through the ontology to these other resources. And we do build what are called axioms in the ontology world, but they're really disease to disease connections. How do we codify that a disease has a specific phenotype, has a specific onset? We use regular, how do I say it? Regular phrases. You call them axioms, but I think it's easier to think of them as phrases so that you have a relationship, a disease has a phenotype, that's a relationship, and then you name the phenotype from the phenotype ontology. And by building this over time across all of the diseases, we now have a system, which I'll show you, which you can then mine from the other perspective, go from those other ontologies and mine into the diseases. See, pick them apart, look at the differences between them or across them or the similarities. In the back end, I wanted to remind everyone, it's really a network graph of connections. This is what an ontology looks like in the back end. This is just an example of COVID-19. Again, thinking about for any particular disease, you can have up to a half a dozen or so, and we keep expanding other pieces of data connected to it. So this is showing you symptoms and transmission methods. But again, I think if you wanted to look at which diseases are transmitted in a certain method. You could pull it out now. Which diseases are transmitted by a certain type of pathogen. You can use the NCBI taxonomy to look down that tree to again start to pull out those diseases, look at commonalities. And this is just showing you a little bit of that representation. One other thing I want to mention before I moved on and talked about the knowledge base is this is another type of work that our ontology does. We team up with other research groups. In this case, we're remodeling how we looked at glioma, and this is with the Civic Research Group and ClinGen. The WHO comes out with what are called blue books, and not every year there's different ones, but different areas of cancer. So we go through those with other clinician teams, and we try to reassess this newly named cancer. Where does it belong in the ontology? Or there's a new nomenclature. How does that fit with what it was called before? Even this example, malignant glioma, seems pretty straightforward. It's now called high grade glioma. Now, would two systems know that that is the same thing if we didn't tell it? So we have to put it into semantic relationships. We then specify that high grade glioma has synonym, which is a relationship term, malignant glioma. So that's something we continue to go through. And the tree, oh, I didn't do that. Okay, interesting. Sorry. The tree is showing you the green bits here that changed with that analysis, just for this small set of the tree. And we continue to do it. As at the bottom of this slide, it shows you, I worked on sarcoma about a week ago, and now our clinician team's going through the tougher use cases. But again, this is something that's ongoing. So if you see changes, and that's why you'll see them. Okay, so the infrastructure. For those of you that are interested in the back end of our system, this is demonstrating what we've been doing to build that knowledge base. We did have to expand our virtual machines on the back end, to have separate databases, both for the ontology trees and the new knowledge base. Again, that important firewall in between, and then have our front end system that you can ping it, you can look at the data. But again, just thinking about all the aspects that had to go into it. And I put all the nitty gritty details at the bottom for those that are interested. This is also up on our website. Anything you see in the slides here, they are on our website and they're available for you to look at as well. I just wanted to mention another thing one of my team members put together called Do-Utils. So as we are looking at our user base, who's using us, how they're using us, we want to make that a more systematic approach. He published this last year. It's again a way for all of us to assess who's using you. What are they using you for? We need to do it for our funders. We need to do it. I like to do it to inform me of what it's being used for. How is it being used? Are there ways that we could represent the data better to help those users? So we keep putting in new systems into that Do-Utils, and that's available on our GitHub repository. One thing we're putting in, it's very small, but it's useful. A dictionary, our own personal dictionary. When we used to build ontologies in Obo, if people remember Obo, we do that now in Protege to OWL ontologies. There's no spell check anymore. So we found over time we really would like to have one. So we're putting things like our own dictionary together. And anything we do build is open and usable and shareable. Okay, so the Do knowledge base. This gives you lots of text describing it, and it's all on our website. Basically wanted a system so that we could do in-depth queries of our database and other related databases, and I'll show you that. So that's the Sparkle Sandbox. This all came online in June. The other is the faceted search, and that will allow you to, and I'll demonstrate, well, not demonstrate, but I'll show you slides on how we can look at all the different types of data connected to disease to then further look at relatedness between diseases. And this is right from our website. I'll wait. But yes, you can get all this information, but I want to make sure there's a good explanation of it. And I'm not going to read through them all, but basically those are the basic aspects of it. So on the left, you're seeing the Do Sparkle Sandbox. This is a Sparkle endpoint. So and then the endpoint is bolded there, and it's also on the website. So you can ping it from your own server if you want to play with it. But on our server, to start us off with, we create a set of pre-canned Sparkle queries that are editable on our page. So you can pull out data sets. We want to create machine learning ready data sets. We update this every month. Apparently, I got a note when I was waiting. My developer is launching the site, the update today. It was supposed to be on Friday, but he had an emergency in his family. So anyway, today. But every month, the idea is we add new Sparkle queries because, as I'm curating data, I'm like, oh, I would really like it if I could have X, Y, Z. And then we make it a Sparkle query and we stick it on the site. People can also suggest their own. We did make the box editable. So if you have your own Sparkle query, you can put it in. I mean, if it doesn't work, it'll tell you. If because Sparkle can be quite finicky. We do have, and I think I show you on the later slide, how to write these Sparkle queries. There's some help on that site, but these all work. So if you want to play with Sparkle and kind of get your feet dirty, you can try out any of these, click on it, it'll fill it in, it'll run, you can download the data set. So the idea is we want to be able to let people programmatically get into the data and then play with it. On the faceted search page on the right, and I'll show you a little bit more in a minute, this is where it was built with my clinician team in mind. They want to look at disease from a patient walks in, like I said earlier, they have this phenotype, age of onset, certain family history maybe. They want to be able to say what other diseases are related to the disease I'm looking on based on these features, right? So these are the features of a disease. That's one way of putting it. We call them facets. That's just the name for putting the site together. But it allows you to mine them and look at similarities or differences between types or sets of disease. Anyway, so there's that. And I'll show you that in a minute. Have a little bit slide here, 2 slides on Sparkle for those that may not be as familiar with it. It is a fascinating, very finicky language to play with. That's why we gave you pre-canned queries. But it can be very useful. There's many other sites that have Sparkle endpoints. One of the things we're developing next is putting in what are called federated Sparkle queries. We've already prototyped them in the back end. I haven't launched them yet. Basically, if you have a Sparkle endpoint, Uniprote's a good example. We're already doing queries through Uniprote's federated endpoint. You can query diseases from me and the diseases in Uniprote and other data in Uniprote and pull it all back as a data set. That's what the Sparkle endpoints let you do. So you have to formulate the queries and then pull back the data. So our next iteration in the next number of months will have more of these federated queries. It allows us to play with data more, maybe ask other questions. One of the things I really love about it is a database that has diseases, and maybe they're not linked to the disease ontology. That's totally fine. Maybe they have mesh IDs, or maybe they have SNOMED terms. Because of the Sparkle query, you can tell it what to match on. And then I can pull that related information out. It gives me more power to my queries and to my data downloads. So I encourage you to check it out. This slide is really just giving you a few steps of what you do with this Sparkle sandbox. We do have a tutorial online. Basically, again, you can select any of the pre-canned queries that we put together. If you have a favorite one you want to see on the site, so you don't always have to paste it in, there's a button there. You can let us know. And we do, again, update them every month, adding new ones. My guys at work are already thinking, well, we have to reorganize it because now we have ones that do this and we have ones that do that. Again, because it's a new system. We just launched it in June. And so, again, we will be adding new types of data and new types of queries. But again, I'm showing you on the bottom right, just a real small snapshot of the data types you get out. And it comes in a nice little box. But again, it's downloadable in different formats, and you can grab that data and play with it. This is the other Sparkle side I want to make sure I include. If someone's not familiar with Sparkle, I want to break down the components of it and what it does. If you take any of the queries we already provide, you could switch out bits of it. So you ask different questions of the data without having to rewrite the whole thing. That's why I put in the different data elements on the bottom right. If you want to play with the ID, the disease name, those kinds of things. So again, have at it, enjoy. So the faceted query interface. What I'm showing you here is really obviously a big overview. The numbers in the boxes in the middle, those are the different data types you currently can query on this site. These are all of the imports we have. We're adding new ones, but it's a count of disease terms and that are related to those data types. Again, they come from different biomedical ontologies in the OBO Foundry. You can pick and choose which ones you want to look at. It has filter, it has autocomplete for text. And as you select, say, an NCBI term, and it will then, you'll see it in real time, it'll go, it filters. So you'll select your disease, your one term, and then all the other facets go, sorry, and that doesn't really say that, but it looks like that. Like you're at a train station, think of the ticker take moving. You get to see the other options reselect. Thank you. Anyway, yes, so you can redo that. So you can see how it changes and get the data. This is showing you a more specific search of doing exactly that. I want to look at this particular set of phenotypes, abnormality in metabolism. And then I reselect like that, the CDs, different symptoms, and then it gives me subsets, right? So you only get the set of symptoms that are associated with different options of that particular phenotype. and so on. And then you can get your data sets out, and machine learning ready data sets, you can download them. Again, I want to think about distribution. How are we sending that data out there? How do we, if we're building this ecosystem, how do we make it reusable? What are the different formats we have represented? How do we add new formats and make that available to others? And so we're thinking of that all the time. It is downloadable and queryable from different places, different resources. So this, again, thinking about that ecosystem. Where do you distribute your data? How do you make it available? Bioregistry at the bottom, if you haven't used that yet, it's a great resource to interconnect data. It's just one of the examples you can do that with. One of the things I want to make sure I pointed out is I talked about DoUtils earlier. We want to track who's using us. This is one of the figures from our statistics page on the Disease Ontology website. We track who uses us and how they're using us. We've tried different methods, different sources, and I even admit years ago, I was looking through PubMed every 6 months. It's brutal. Don't do it if you can help it. Automate where you can. But so we get who cites us. That's a statistic I can report to my program officer, put on our website. And we then mine that data to see how they're using us, right? Which subset of these people are these groups and what are using us and what are they using us for? It helps me figure out development. What areas are growing and evolving so that I can grow. On the right, we look at both Google Analytics and we look at all the citations. Where are those resources being built? And then we want to see what's our global use. And then we break it down by country. And then for representation, we put it into subcontinents or subregions. Again, seeing where it's growing, where it's evolving. It's another way for us to see maybe where we need to reach out more to other groups and then see what's new. We do include on our website highlights from our user community. We really look at these to see what's been done, and you'll see these on our website. You'll see them in our newsletters. I have a few copies in the latest newsletter, came out last week, if you want to see it. It again gives us a different perspective on what's being done and how it's used. I always want to make sure I mention this. It doesn't, an ontology is not built by me. It's not built by the two PIs that started this. It's built by a massive team over time. We recognize all of these individuals on our website, but I want to make sure I recognize them today. We are very much guided by our scientific advisory board as well. They give us great insight on how to grow, how to evolve. So I want to make sure they're recognized today. And as part of building an ecosystem, thinking about where you came from, bringing the different types of individuals, different times, and I've thought about this slide. I also want to mention there's bioinformatics analysts in this slide. There's clinicians. There is resource developers, ontologists, all sorts of different kinds of roles that people have had. But again, it's an ecosystem of knowledge. Medical students. I had a whole bunch of people in the middle there. Medical students who were doing definitions with me at one point for a number of years. Okay, and lastly, just want to show you my team. This is our clinician team and our informatics team. And one thing I wanted to point out is if you want to join our public Slack, oh, don't go away. Okay, our public Slack site, I tweeted about it today. If you go to the DOE Twitter site at Disease Ontology and you want to talk about diseases on our public Slack site, please do. And I thank you for your time and appreciate you coming to this talk. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sure.
We don't have micro at the moment, unfortunately. So if there are any questions, then just ask me. Then that and try to.
If people have questions, you can ask your questions, but make sure that our speaker repeats those questions so that they are picked up by the microphone.
Okay.
You can just come up and ask if you want as well.
So are there any questions?
Yeah, I have one. Very great talk, and I just wonder, for what you mentioned about the WHO classification of the disease. Right now, they have incorporated a lot of the molecular features to it, like the high-grade glioma. I'm a pediatric studies. So initially, the initial classification, for example, DIPG, they obviously do not, they include both histone H3, K27 mutated ones versus not mutated one.
Right.
So when you're migrating to a new system, if you don't know the individual genotypes, you obviously lose the kind of the granularity that previous one has. So how do you deal with this information get lost during the translation?
Yeah, we definitely we struggled with not struggle, but we definitely had to prototype our process on how we deal with it. So we keep the old data in, and we add the new data, and we will actually even add comments to make sure people can get to them from the old to the new, because we have many cancer resources that'll have the annotations of a previous name or previous specification. We want to make sure they don't get lost between the two, but we do exactly that. We make sure that it's mapped between, and we have notations in there so we don't lose them. Because it's very important not to lose the data and not to lose the connectivity. We can also have synonyms to a current name of an old name. We can link records as well, so that makes it so data isn't lost. Thank you for your question.
Are there any other questions? I have some. if we have time. I was wondering if you receive feedback from other communities to improve the ontologies or the ontological system.
Oh, we get feedback almost every day.
Okay.
Yeah, in all sorts of formats. So we have a GitHub repository that has tickets and issues. People can do it that way. I get emails, tweets. I'd say 80% of our things come through GitHub now because we've kind of really promoted that over time. But yes, we get things almost every single day. And it's great. And we're happy to get it. We research every single thing we get. If I get a new disease term asked about, we research it as if we've never researched it before to make sure we really cover all that knowledge and refamiliarize ourselves. And then we always respond back, explain what we've seen, what we found, and then we discuss. It's not just a done deal that we assess it and add it in. It's always a conversation. And that's, again, why the disease ontology community is so important.
Very nice. And this kind of feedback, like to the previous talks, like maybe recommendations on how to improve textual annotation for making better machine learning predictions, this kind of...
Oh, yeah. We've worked with the text mining community and the machine learning community for years. And yeah, absolutely work back and forth with them. Because it's a conversation between the two to work together. And a number of AI companies, actually. They'll have us assess their data sets. And so they help us do mappings, we help assess.
Very nice. I was wondering also if you, in the ecosystem, there is a kind of subsetting the knowledge graph? A tool to subset or a way to subset part of the knowledge graph, the DO knowledge graph?
Oh, subset.
Subset, sorry.
No, my hearing's a little off. I was diving on the weekend. Yes, we actually make subsets of the knowledge graph all the time. We have on our GitHub repository, there's a section of it for subsets. We have groups that'll say, I only want this branch of your ontology, or only want this 100 diseases. And so we make a boutique data set for them, and that goes out with every release. So anyone can ask for a subset, but with the new Sparkle query, you can actually download a subset as well yourself.
But the community has to, or the user has to ask you to do the
Well, they could
subsetting.
pull the ontology out of our GitHub and make it themselves if they want to. It's open source, so we purposely give it away so people will use it. But if they want us to help them reproduce it each month, we're happy to do that.
Okay. So my last question, are you planning to use exposome data?
Exposome data.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're happy. Yeah, we would be happy to use exposome data. Yeah.
It was one of the things that you started as a...
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have started working on defining different exposures and diseases. So we have our clinician team, we put together about 20 diseases or so, 25, where the exposure and the disease it's a rock solid kind of a bit of data that's come together. We are being cautious and not putting exposures in that are likely to cause disease. So we're being careful. Like, so fetal alcohol syndrome and alcohol is a good example. It's a known cause at a certain time of gestation and a disease. So yeah, we are putting them in, and that's growing this year as well. So, and if others want us to add things in, please let us know. And we do the provenance of where the data came from. So if we say a disease and an exposure are linked, the resources will all be there to support that.
Okay, and a question that just came
Sure.
up. Are you stating diseases in other languages other than English?
That's a very good question. We have just launched the beginnings of a Spanish DO. So we are currently actually translating all of our web pages. And the next thing will be the diseases, the synonyms, and the definitions in the next year. Yeah.
Very nice. And last one.
That's fine.
Are you using Sesame?
Are we using
Sesame standard for mapping?
Oh, Sesame. Well, Sesame actually came out after we started doing, and actually we've gone through Sesame, and that's the triple SOM how you should do mappings, right? Yes, and we do some of the things they've been doing. I think some of the things they were doing kind of grew from what we did. And so yes, the provenance, all those things, yes, that'll be in our system.